And I'm the Medical Director of Sanofi Pasteur in the Philippines, and I'll be your moderator for today. As we all know, the topic for this afternoon is dengue. And as a Filipino, most of us have been touched by dengue at one point in our lives, either directly or through a friend, a loved one, or someone we know. We all have stories. I'm sure everyone has their own dengue story. Someone here just got discharged last week from severe dengue. So we all have these stories. We all have stories to tell. But I'd like to share with you my most recent and most vivid experience with dengue. A year ago, my niece was confined in the intensive care unit of the Philippine Children's Medical Center. And at the time, my cousin, who is her mother, was an OFW in London. And all the time she was in the ICU, we couldn't show her the videos of her daughter over Skype because we knew this would be devastating for her. And the overall feeling we had at the time was one of helplessness. No, you can't really do anything about it. And I was thinking, how many more other people are in the same position as we were at that time? And it got me to think and ask ourselves, what could we have done to prevent this disease? And what could we do more to avoid getting this disease in the future? And I just thought there is definitely a better way to step up the fight against dengue. So having said that, allow us to present this short video as our introduction to the world's first dengue vaccine.
Stuck mo? Hindi.
This might not have happened if Ricardo hadn't become the father of Thiago, his son, who's turning 11. This might not have happened if he hadn't decided to marry Maria and have a child. Maria and her pretty floral dress. They met at university 10 years before. But Maria may not have ever met Ricardo if at the age of 4 she hadn't avoided meningitis during a serious epidemic in her country. And that may not have happened if Paolo, the doctor who vaccinated her, hadn't devoted his life to ensuring the health of his community. All of this might not have happened. And yet, it did happen. It happened because generations of research teams and doctors around the world have devoted their careers to preventing and combating infectious diseases like smallpox, polio, and meningitis. But what? Namely, after 20 years of research, the first vaccine against dengue was developed. A vaccine against a disease that infects 390 million people a year. So here's what happened today. Today, Thiago and his dad Ricardo were among the first people to be vaccinated against dengue. Sanofi Pasteur, creating vaccines, protecting life.
Thank you very much. I hope you found that video very inspiring. Moving on to today's session, owing to the prominent role that the Philippines has played with regards to leading the public and private introduction of the dengue vaccination program, we are fortunate this afternoon to have with us two international experts to walk with us through the disease and through the safety and efficacy profile of the dengue vaccine. May I please ask that you hold all your questions until after the presentations are finished, because you might find that the presentations actually answer your questions. But of course, we will be glad to answer any and all questions that you might have after the presentations. So the first topic we have for this afternoon will dwell on the disease and the economic burden of dengue in the Philippines and the WHO or the World Health Organization recommendations in light of the Philippine settings. Our first presenter is Mr. Joshua Neelan. Josh earned his medical degree from medical microbiology from the University of Edinburgh, where he graduated with first-class honors. Subsequently, Joshua trained in infectious diseases and epidemiology at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He has 6 years of experience working with WHO WIPRO office, working on the field of dengue prevention and control in countries such as Cambodia, the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, and the Caribbean and the Pacific Islands. He is now the lead for epidemiology for Sanofi Pasteur in Asia, which includes among his responsibilities the design, implementation, and analysis of studies to support the development and launch of new and existing vaccines. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Mr. Joshua Neelan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rubai, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for coming today. So as mentioned by Rubai, I'll just spend 5 minutes just talking a little bit about dengue epidemiology and the implications for vaccination here in the Philippines. So when talking about dengue burden, really the first thing we'd like to ask is how many dengue cases occur in the world? And historically, we've had very poor information here. We basically had no idea about the number of cases. But recently there have been a number of studies which have given us much better data. What we now say is approximately half of the global population is at risk of dengue, and maybe nearly 400 million infections occur every year. And most of those, around 70%, happen in Asia. That translates into nearly 100 million cases of disease, 500,000 hospitalizations, about 2.5% of whom die. So recognizing that huge and increasing burden, the World Health Organization has in their strategic plan from 2012 some objectives. And the objectives are to reduce the mortality of dengue by 50% and reduce the number of cases by 25%. Unfortunately, those targets are not being met. So if we go specifically to the Philippines, on the top left-hand side here, you can see the number of cases in the blue bars. And you can see actually, since 2010, there's been a big increase in the number of cases. And there are approximately 150,000 cases every single year. And there are also around 500 deaths per year in the Philippines. And you can see from that graph, actually, the picture seems to be getting worse rather than getting better. Excuse me, sir. But actually, dengue is highly underreported, mainly because many cases are mild and unrecognized. So there's one very famous study conducted by researchers at the University of Oxford in the UK and published in Nature journal. And what they found in the Philippines, for every dengue case which is reported, there are 40 cases which occur which are never reported. So these are the data which populate the new World Health Organization estimates for dengue. And this study found there are around 3 million cases per year in the Philippines. Now, 3 million cases, it's not a very easy number to remember. So last night I was in bed and I thought I'll do some maths. This actually corresponds in the Philippines to one symptomatic dengue case every 10.2 seconds. So you can see it's an absolutely incredible burden of disease here. In addition to the public health impact of dengue, there are also very significant economic impacts. This one study published in the Lancet journal, the Lancet Infectious Diseases, earlier this year, it found that the cost of dengue per year globally is around $9 billion US. So this is in excess even of huge events such as Typhoon Yolanda here in the Philippines. And the study found that in the Philippines each year, dengue cost a total of around $643 million US, so 30.1 billion pesos. And this includes different costs, so the cost of treating dengue, the indirect cost, so lost productivity because of dengue, and also the cost of death. So the news is not all bad. We know there's a lot of dengue. We now have a tool for dengue prevention, the dengue vaccine. And this document here was published by the World Health Organization on the 29th of July this year. and it's the WHO position paper on the use of dengue vaccine. And this document came about following a long review by what they call the WHO Strategic Advisory Group of Experts, SAGE. And they reviewed everything to do with this vaccine, and they recommended that the vaccine should be used for public immunization programs in areas where dengue is very endemic. So here's some of the language which comes in that document. And I'd really like to mention that middle graph there. So they said it should be used to maximize the public health impact of the vaccination. And they use different thresholds to describe endemicity, and they use the number 70%. So they say basically, if the endemicity can be described by seroprevalence of 70% or higher, they recommend the vaccine should be used. So let's jump to some Filipino data that describes seroprevalence. So here's a study conducted in Cebu City, and it finds, so these red bars here correspond to the seroprevalence in different age groups. And you can see that by the ages of 6 to 15, 80% of Filipino children are already seropositive. So you can see that in this area of Cebu, it's very clear that the vaccine should be used in public programs, or it would be certainly aligned with the position of the World Health Organization to use this dengue vaccine in Cebu. The other data source we have is from San Pablo City in Region 4A, and again, you see the same thing. Remembering that the dengue vaccine is licensed for children aged 9, you can see that by the age of 9, approximately 90% of children are already seropositive. So the level of endemicity here is completely compliant with that WHO guidance to vaccinate in public programs. So thank you very much for your time. I'll now pass back to Rubai and then on to Dr. Milan. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. Please hold and note all your questions while we move on to the second presentation. So the second presentation will walk you through the clinical development program and of course the efficacy and safety of the dengue vaccine. Our second presenter is Dr. Alan Bukenu. Alan obtained his medical degree at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium and subsequently obtained his Master of Public Health degree at the University of Texas School of Public Health, and went on to complete a fellowship in adult infectious diseases at the Baylor College of Medicine in the US. He is a co-author of pivotal dengue trials in Asia and numerous other trials on vaccines and dengue. Currently, Alan is located in Singapore and is our Associate Vice President and Regional Head of Clinical Research and Development for Sanofi Pasteur in Asia Pacific. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Alan Bukenu.
So thank you for the introduction, and like my colleagues, I want to thank you for being here. You know, the Philippines is really a fascinating place for many reasons, but for you, most of you are journalists, I understand. I think you're never running out of news. I mean, you had just a typhoon coming through. There were mini riots, I understand, in the city yesterday. I didn't see it, but I heard about it. And so you still decided to pick this event and spend some time with us. So I appreciate that. I think it's because of the wealth of all the things that happen here that you probably have very young people picking up on journalism. I see young girls, they're already part of your team. So I'll try to have a presentation of about 10 to 15 minutes that is reasonably basic, but we have a wealth of information. We've been working on these vaccines for a very long time. I will not show you everything under the sun. What bothers me a little bit is that we've been working intensely with a large team of external investigators and experts, professors in the Philippines, in Thailand, in many countries, and an internal team of experts diligently shared information transparently. But then when you look what's being published sometimes or put on media, it's not really reflecting the reality. And it's bothering me to a great degree, because what we want is not overstate what we have, but we surely don't want misinformation to go out, because that's not justice. So I'd rather let you come to the conclusions of what we have, but this is the journey that Sanofi Pasteur went through from the beginning. So they've been working on a dengue vaccine for 21, 22 years, and the science has greatly developed over time. So we did not know quite as much about dengue in the early days. There was a trial and error. They tried with some early vaccine candidates that didn't work as well. They improved, and finally there was a hit with a candidate that has been finally taken to market that is now available. So it's been a long, long journey. with a multitude of people and collaborations. This is not only pure internal Sanofi Pasteur work. So why was it so complicated? I mentioned one thing, that the science has developed. We did not know as much 20 years back as we know today. But there are a few things about dengue specifically that make it harder compared to other diseases to get a good vaccine. One thing is that there are 4 serotypes, and you heard that already by Josh. There are 4 different serotypes of dengue, and typically it's your second infection that puts you at greatest risk to get very severe dengue. That's where people get hemorrhagic fever, that's where people get admitted to the hospital, that's where people sometimes, when they're unlucky, die. So it's not your first or third or fourth. Typically for most of the people, it's the second infection. So when you give a vaccine, you want to protect against all these 4 serotypes. You can relatively easily make a vaccine against one strain only. They started that in the 1940s actually. There were other teams working on that. And it wasn't that hard, but when you start putting it all together, then you have some interference. That's why we came up with the construct we have today. A smart construct that gets around a large part of these problems. So I want you to understand that we ought to respect the science. Some people may see the profile of the vaccine and say, well, this is not really perfect. We have gone a long way, knowing that there was nothing there before, knowing what a long journey it has been. I think this is a great accomplishment. This is really a breakthrough because what was not possible in the past suddenly seemed feasible. So you need to have a vaccine against all 4 strains. For dengue also, we don't have an animal model. That may not mean much to you, but as a scientist, it means that you have to go to humans. Now, we only go to humans when we have a high level of confidence that what we will do will be safe. We don't want to hurt the model. You need to do so many more steps before you can scale up and put your first vaccine in humans, and it takes so much more time. So a lot of years go into it before you get to that stage. Eventually we passed all that. What we have is a vaccine now that looks like this. So our vaccine covers all 4 strains. And it's a recombinant vaccine. What you can see here is the cartoon. But we have dengue serotype 1, 2, 3, and 4 represented in our recombinant vaccines. It comes in a powder, in a vial, and you have to mix it with the liquid. So the nurse or doctor, it's usually the nurse who gives the vaccine, will inject the fluid in the vial, shake it, and then draw it up and inject it. So we have done a large number of studies, as I mentioned before. You can see here a map of the world. Most of the studies were done in endemic countries. We developed this vaccine for people who need it. So at this point in time, it's indicated for endemic countries, not for travelers. Although we did some studies in the United States, and we did do some studies in Australia as well, but otherwise most of the studies were in countries where you really have active circulation of dengue. There were 5 studies, phase 1, there were 14 studies of phase 2, and there were 6 studies of phase 3. Most of those have been completed. We still have a little bit of a late follow-up of some of these phase 3 trials. All these data have been transparently published whenever we can, have been shared with your authorities. Philippine FDA, just like other national authorities, have been shared with the WHO, with the strategic advisory group, as Josh mentioned, at WHO, and so forth. Philippines has been our partner from the very beginning. We feel that in the country there was a drive, a wish to be part of the solution. We felt that in entities like RITM, that there is a genuine interest to be part of cutting-edge science and try to help develop vaccines or products of other sorts against all sorts of diseases. So we found for dengue that the Philippines has been a steady, early partner, and we have data from phase 1 through phase 2 to phase 3. So the Philippines has been part of our development throughout. And again, that's because of the commitment of the country and your lead investigators, your lead scientists in the country. When this vaccine was first launched, Philippines was actually the very first country. It's not the only one anymore. I'll come back to that in just a moment. But that was not a coincidence. If your country is cutting edge and has that level of enthusiasm, it's also not a surprise that there was a greater comfort in reviewing all the data. The real innovation and challenges came with phase 3 studies, efficacy studies. What does that mean, an efficacy study? Compared to the other trials, you inject the product and you just see if it's safe and what the immune response may be. So you draw a bit of blood and you see if you can see changes. Efficacy studies have nothing to do with that. It's to see if people really don't get sick anymore after you injected them. These studies were the first studies to prevent dengue ever done, either with a product or with a vaccine. It's never been done before. And so there was a high complexity in designing these studies. If you're the first to do something, you have nothing to look back at. And so you sometimes can make guesses and you have to see if it all pans out. We had actually 3 studies. The first was a trial in Thailand of about 4,000 children. And that was then later followed by 2 phase 3 studies. The phase 3 studies were done in Asia Pacific, 5 countries, including the Philippines. And the other parallel study was done in Latin America, that includes also 5 countries, and there were 20,000 children included there. The difference between Asia and Latin America is that the force of infection is twice as high here. So you need less people in the study to still have the same power to observe the same things. The epicenter of dengue globally is really this part of the world. It's a privilege for you to live here, and it's the burden that you shoulder. But there is no place on earth that has more dengue than this region. I'm not pointing only at the Philippines, but you look at Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia. There's few places that have more than that, actually. We published our data. The data in Asia were published in The Lancet, 2014. We published our Latin American data in the New England Journal of Medicine. And then we put the study results together. We did what we call a meta-analysis. So that was not a new study, but it's trying to combine all the results, because you can sometimes observe more things. You have more strength in your observations. And the meta-analysis was again published in the New England Journal of Medicine, because it refers to the indications. The vaccine is indicated in children 9 years and above, and also in adults all the way up to age 45. That's the indication for the Philippines. And that is supported by the publication here. So what did the publication show? And you're the judge of these numbers. Some people get very excited and some people get less excited, but what we found was that in these efficacy studies, you see a reduction against symptomatic dengue, and some of them are very severe and some of them are mild, of 65.6% if you give the vaccine to the children 9 and above. So I exclude the younger ones, I'll come back to that in a moment. So 65.6%. Is that a great number, or how do you see that? Well, we feel that this is a breakthrough because it was never done before. And look at these other numbers. The reduction in hospitalization because of dengue was down nearly 81%. So to be precise, 80.8%. So the chances that you keep your child out of the hospital after being vaccinated is actually a very encouraging high number. And the reduction of severe dengue, so the hemorrhagic fever, which is the forerunner of more complications and fatalities, was actually 93%. I think from a public health perspective, these are very important numbers. That is where the big concerns of families are. You may be concerned of having a mild dengue, and it definitely is a nuisance, but staying out of the hospital and getting the terrible complications should really be the big ambition. And I think those numbers really speak for themselves. What we saw in looking at all the data was also that some people had been exposed to dengue before already. We had a sample, and so we could see who had had dengue once before. They all got enrolled in the study, and those who had been exposed to the dengue vaccine did not have more side effects. The vaccine was as safe in those who had never been exposed, who were naive, versus those who had already an exposure. And we could see that the vaccine efficacy in those who had been exposed was actually 81.9%. Those who had not been exposed before, it was a 52.5%. So there was some difference there, but by and large, supportive for all ages, for all statuses. So now about safety, and I think this is an important point, because if you look at the misinformation that circulates, there's a lot of rumors about safety. So I share with you what we have, and there's more information on that in the publications as well. But we looked at the vaccine in ages 9 to 60 years of age, because we've given it to people up to 60 as well. And when you look at these graphs here, it may be a little small for the people far, but I'll explain it. You have the blue, which is the people who get the vaccine, and you have the orange, which is placebo. Placebo is like water. It's not active. There's no medicine in there. And you can see that the unsolicited, non-serious reactions, which can be, anything that is spontaneously reported. The solicited systemic reactions, which is things like fever and headache and so forth. the injection site reactions, which is like redness at the site or pain at the site, all these bars for orange are not that different from blue, meaning this vaccine is actually very safe. It is nearly as safe as a placebo. It's nearly as safe as giving water. So whatever vaccine you will give, you will always get some reactions. But the excess that you have with the blue is not that much. The safety profile was not a concern. We have been very reassured looking at all these data. So if there are rumors out there that this vaccine is not safe, it is not based on our data. I would like to know where they get it from. And what are the side effects? Very common, which is typically defined by regulatory authorities as 10% or more. Very common are things like headache, muscle pain, or pain at the site of injection, and sometimes a mild fever. Now these are things that typically are resolved spontaneously. You don't need any medication. You don't need to interrupt your daily activities. It's what we call grade 1 or grade 2. It resolves within 1 or 2 days. It's rare that it's longer than that. Common, between 1 and 10%, are again injection site reactions, but it's not the pain, then it's the redness and a bit of swelling or itch at the site of injection. So these things are either very common or common. And then under uncommon, you see a lot of things that are being recorded, because in the study, anything that happens, we report. But many of the people get nausea for other reasons as well. Everything, however, is captured here. And in the uncommon, which is between 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 100, you see a number of things here. So the link to vaccine is not necessarily proven. We report what we capture in the studies. I want to come, and I need your patience for just a moment to walk through that slide, to the impact over time. Because there were rumors that perhaps this vaccine can provoke in some people more problems over time. So I want to dispel the myth and show you exactly what data we have. And this was presented at the Pan-American Dengue Research meeting and will also come in publication. So you have a premium type of presentation here. But what you see here is a Kaplan-Meier curve. And what it shows is the disease incidence over time. So what you see here is a time curve in months. It goes up to 54 months, so 4.5 years. People get the vaccine here, month 0. They get a second dose at month 6, and they get a third dose at month 12, and then you kind of wait. The green line is the children who were above 9 years of age who did get the vaccine. As the lines go higher, you see more cases of dengue. So you cannot say that the vaccine is perfect. If it was perfect, it would stay bottom low. You would see no cases. So the green line goes up a little bit. Unfortunately, the vaccine is not perfect. Now, perfection is not much of a human thing, so this is what we have. But the red line is people who received the vaccine placebo. They didn't get the dengue vaccine, they got the water injection. And the red line goes much higher, much quicker. So if we say, and this is protection against hospitalization. If we say 80% protection against hospitalization, this is sustained over time. You can see that already from the very beginning, and these lines remain separate throughout. So 4.5 years out, you see that these lines are still different. There's many more people being hospitalized because of dengue when they did not get vaccinated compared to the real vaccine group here. That's for 9 and above. Now the comments have been made for younger kids that perhaps it's not safe there. This is what happens in younger kids. These are the kids below 9 years of age who were also in the study, in the blue line, who didn't get the vaccine. So they also get dengue. The difference with the previous slide is that this blue line goes up faster, right? Because the green line before stayed lower, and I'll come to that in a moment. The red line is the same as the other one. These are non-vaccinated people, so they get dengue throughout. Here they seem to have benefit from the vaccine, and then the lines become more narrow again. The blue line, however, does not go over the red line. You never see more cases of hospitalized dengue in people who are vaccinated. What you see is a benefit in the beginning, and then the benefit is being lost gradually over time. But you don't have an excess of cases. That is a big part of the misunderstanding out there. So if you put the curves together, now you see the whole thing. The red lines are the non-vaccinated people, whether they were above 9 or under 9. The green line is the children 9 years and above, and you can see the difference. The gap is white. So 80% of the children are kept out of the hospital if they receive the vaccine. The blue line is the younger kids. They have benefit in the beginning, but then they lose it. So if we do not recommend this vaccine in children younger than 9, it's because it's not fair. They don't have the same benefit. The risk benefit is not the same. They have an initial benefit, but it's lost over time. How can anyone recommend that? Why is this difference there? That is still subject to investigation. So we have not fully understood all the science, but we're working on that. And one day, when we understand, perhaps the age indications might get adjusted. Today, that's what we have. But the blue line never goes over the red. People who say that we have an excess number of cases are misrepresenting the data. What they say is that there's an increase here, and suppose this increase continues from the very beginning throughout, maybe the blue line will be like this. Well, suppose, but I just show you the real data. The real data are that this doesn't happen. We see a good safety profile, and with the study in Thailand, we completed 6 years. This is 4.5. In 6 years in Thailand, we have pretty much the same curves. That blue line never crosses the other. So this was a little bit long-winded, and I thank you for your patience, but I thought this was an important point to make. The work is not finished. When you bring a new vaccine, you still want to check if the use of the vaccine will yield the results that you expect. So will you find the effectiveness? Will you find the safety that you were anticipating? How long is the protection? I show you data of 4.5 years and 6 years, but what happens after? So there are things that we still need to track ourselves. What happens if you give the vaccine with other products, with a flu vaccine or whatever vaccine you want to give? Is it safe? Can you do that? We still have an obligation to do a number of additional studies to yield more data. At this time of the development, that's normal. There's a lot of things we know. There are a few more things we need to generate. But when people say, well, how can you bring this product to the market when you don't have everything? Well, you never have everything. This is life science that goes on. I think we have so much information that is very supportive to the introduction of this vaccine that there is no reason to wait with this. This has happened for other products as well. So by now we have 12 licenses, and the list is growing because we have submitted to so many more. You see that it has been approved in Brazil, Philippines of course, Mexico, El Salvador, Paraguay, Singapore, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Peru, Indonesia, Thailand, Bolivia. So this is a growing list. It changes day by day, week to week. And the vaccine has also been introduced in public programs. The Philippines has been the very first, but there's also a public program now in Brazil, and they're close to starting also one in Mexico. So you're having the honors of being the first, but you're no longer the only, right? And then in terms of availability on the private market, there is also a growing number of countries that have it on the private market. So with that, you have a status update of where we are. The vaccine is being produced in France. I don't know if you care much about that, but it's a state-of-the-art facility, so this is GMP. I think it can muster any scrutiny. The capacity is about 100 million doses a year. I think there's some stretch where they can increase that a little bit further, and you have a picture here of the building for those who may feel this is useful. I come back to the numbers because this is the core thing of this vaccine. 65, reduction of symptomatic disease, 80% reduction of hospitalized dengue, and 93% reduction of severe dengue. I thank you for your attention. I'll give the word back to Dr. Rubai.
Thank you, Alan. So I'll keep the slide up for everyone's reference as we go through the open forum. So thank you, Alan and Josh. That was a very extensive discussion and minds. But now I do open the floor for any and all questions you might have for our speakers.
My question is, how many times a student going back there, how many times a student or person get vaccinated, and who should not be receive the vaccination?
Okay, Alan, I think the question is the primary immunization schedule and of course the contraindication. So if you'd like to answer that. Ouch.
So the vaccine is approved as a 3-dose schedule, and the 3 doses are 6 months apart. There's a little bit of leeway. It shouldn't be clockwise exactly 6 months. There's some room there, but it's a 0, 6, 12-month schedule. Now again, there's questions, is that ideal, is that perfect? This is what we have because this was the most yielding in our studies, and the authorities approved the vaccine based on the schedule we've used in our clinical trials. We also have studies ongoing to try to optimize, to improve the schedule. So this is something that could evolve over time. That happens again with a number of vaccines. If you look at HPV or strep pneumo, these schedules also changed a little bit over time. But it's a 3-dose vaccine, 6 months apart. The contraindications, where do you not want to give that? Well, the first thing is the age restrictions, so 9 to 45, because that's what the authorities have approved. The 9 has been explained because of the balance risk and benefit. There's not sufficient benefit in the younger ones, so we don't go there at this time. The older ones, why 45? Well, there's not so much disease anymore. If you live up to age 45 in the Philippines, and of course we all hope we do, then the chances that you have never been exposed to dengue is not that high. Most of the people have had it a couple of times, and you wouldn't be in exactly the same risk group anymore. That may be different in other countries. If you look at Taiwan, Singapore, they have a lot more dengue in elderly, and they have fatalities to a great degree as well. So that's something that could still adjust over time. You don't, however, want to give it in the group that is not indicated in the country. You have to follow the rules of the land. You also typically don't want to give that to people who are pregnant, so pregnant women, breastfeeding women. You do not give live vaccines. That is a general recommendation for all. You don't give it to immunocompromised people, organ transplant, cancer patients, advanced HIV patients. You would not use this vaccine. In controlled HIV, we don't have data yet. There is an HIV study planned in Latin America. We don't have the data today yet, so it's a blind type of non-use there. Then there are some rare things like thymoma, a cancer of the thymus. You would not use a vaccine in those settings because there's a yellow fever backbone, part of the genome there, and actually it's a formal contraindication for yellow fever vaccine. This is not a yellow fever vaccine at all, but because of the historical link, it was prudent to keep that included. These are rare things. The common things are immunocompromised state and pregnancies.
Yes, please.
You said you wanted to do mass vaccination of dengue, and you have a lot of contraindications. How is that?
90% of Filipino children have already been infected at least once. So by the age of 20, almost all Filipinos have been infected with dengue by that age. It's a very highly endemic environment.
And then as far as the question goes on development of superbugs, these viruses are all alive. They cross-react, they're very promiscuous. And so some of these new offsprings, these new strains, will not thrive well and they will die off. Others will be more virulent, will be more dangerous. It's part of nature, it's the field of microbiology. You see that across many organisms, many viruses and many bacteria. So also for dengue, there's continuous mutations, continuous changes. What we see is that our vaccine covers against some of the critical parts that are maintained. And so even if there are changes, the vaccine holds steady and works across all. The viruses are a little bit different in Latin America from Asia Pac, and yet the numbers are comparable. How will that hold in the future? We don't know, but up to this point, this vaccine is not region-specific and is not strain-specific. We feel we can weather the further changes in strains. So, but for other organisms, this may be a different thing, of course. You think of Zika, look at what problems this is creating, right? It goes to Latin America and suddenly becomes a terrible disease, while before it was more.
It's like our students are being used as guinea pigs. That's what he said.
You want to comment on the first question?
Why it's not approved in France?
Why it's not approved in France?
Yes. So France is not an endemic country. If you look at the zones of dengue that are endemic, it's tropical and subtropical regions. That still affects a lot of people, but it doesn't typically affect Australia, it doesn't affect New Zealand, it doesn't affect Canada, the United States. Yet we have a file running with EMA, so the European authorities are actively looking at the file. We have a file running with the US FDA. There are some smaller territories linked historically to those regions where there is some dengue. And so they are reviewing the file. The product is not approved in France, and France as a single country would not approve this vaccine. In Europe, with the new system, new vaccines of the kind of Dengvaxia have to be approved by the EMA. So, but the file is with the EMA at this point in time. The other question, perhaps for you?
Okay, for the question on Senator Gordon, I think I take it because my colleagues don't really know Senator Gordon. So I think we're well aware of the comments that are circulating and the comment made by Senator Gordon. But as of this moment, we cannot really comment on the budget process. But what we can comment upon is that there was a thorough review done by the Philippine FDA. It's a year-long process. And it's also a vaccine that's been reviewed by a 2-year-long process by the World Health Organization. And just looking at the huge burden, disease burden as illustrated by Josh earlier, of dengue in the Philippines and the huge economic burden, I think it's well, DOH should be congratulated for introducing this vaccine. As for the comment on the guinea pig, I'd like to address that as well. The Philippines might be the leader in terms of implementing this public program, but we are no longer alone. As Alan mentioned, several countries have already started to implement a public program. There is the Parana state of Brazil, and the CONAVA, or the National Vaccination Council of Mexico, has already recommended to start a public introduction program in Mexico, and there are several other countries who are now open for private vaccination: El Salvador, Mexico, and Indonesia.
Up to the France, are you saying then that because dengue is not endemic in France, there is no need for you to license that vaccine? Is that the...
So there's two things. One is the process. New vaccines in Europe don't go to the national authorities.
Okay.
It goes to the EMA, which is the Pan-European Medical Agency. And the EMA is looking at the file. So eventually, if the EMA were to approve, that would cover all countries, including France. But if you think of it, France as a territory, there may have been an accidental transmission or so, but this is not an endemic country. This is not our primary target. There are some overseas regions belonging to France, historically, where they do have dengue, so the country may have interests for those specific distant places. That's about as far as I would go. So I hope that addresses it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, please, ma'am.
Dr. Alan brought up a slide earlier for the side effects for those that were administered the vaccine. My question is, for those children who've already been exposed and they have had whichever serotype of dengue, are the side effects different because they've already been exposed?
So I can show you a number of data, but I think you're referring back to this slide with the common adverse events. It's pretty much the same. No matter what age group, no matter what your serostatus is, whether you've had dengue before or not, it has really no impact. So the safety profile is very comparable across. I hope that's reassuring. There was a point in time, because your second dengue infection is the riskiest one for complications. There was a point in time where people were afraid, saying that if you had dengue before and then you vaccinate, maybe you provoke all that. We haven't seen anything of that. It is safe. So that as a result, this is not a point of concern. Yes, please.
You mentioned the Zika virus, and Zika being a milder form of dengue. Will this vaccine also work for Zika?
Yes, I should maybe not have mentioned Zika because our passion today is with dengue, but we are a large vaccine company. We have an active program for Zika as well. And Zika is also a flavivirus. It is close kin to dengue. If you look at the genetic mapping, 70% of it is about dengue-like. So there is very close proximity. And luckily, there's only one serotype, so we won't have the problems we have with dengue of interference and covering for 4. It's work in progress. But to answer the question, no. If you have a vaccine against Japanese encephalitis, it will cover Japanese encephalitis. If you have a vaccine for dengue, it will cover dengue. If you have a vaccine for yellow fever, it will cover yellow fever. These are all related, and yet you need to have a specific vaccine. So we are working on a separate Zika vaccine.
You said something, you also mentioned something about the strains that this vaccine can work on. Do you see more serious strains developing in the future that could be vaccine resistant?
I think the issue of resistance is a major problem if you look at antivirals and antibiotics, antimicrobials in general. The way around the organisms becoming more virulent, more resistant is exactly through looking at vaccinations. There may be a few techniques. So I think this will be part of the solution over time. Are there organisms that can evade the vaccine that is out there? That needs to be answered disease by disease specifically. There won't be a blanket answer for all. But for dengue specifically, what we see is that even though there are some changes in the dengue viruses, there's quite a bit that remains constant. It's still dengue after all. And if you have antibodies that fight those constant places, you can get the same rates of protection. So we don't see differences in our results in different regions, and yet the viruses are a bit different. They're different in Latin America from Asia, and yet the results are very comparable. So mutations at this point in time is not an issue. Could it become in the future? I don't know, but we don't see signs at this point in time that this is a major headache.
I'm Joel Dano from SciDev. So this is my first time actually to hear about the results about the ages. Specifically talking about the 9 years old and below. So given that information that you have, I'm wondering what advice will you give to governments regarding that, especially when you consider that some, like the Philippines, they have this blanket vaccination for school children. But then you already have kids 9 years old and above, especially if you're going to have it in private schools, and then we're talking about 14 years old who probably already have dengue twice or even thrice. So what recommendation would you give if that would still be effective, considering that those kids already have 1 to 3 dengue cases already? And then secondly, I could see in the chart that you showed that in any case, it goes up, at least in the 4th year. And so, does that mean that you have to revaccinate on the 4th or the 5th year? Thank you.
Alan, you want to address that?
So let me start with the last one, because I remember that question best. So if you look at the graph, if I understand that comment well, you say there's a sudden increase here. So maybe you need to boost, right? If you look at the vaccine efficacy, so those numbers go up in the non-vaccinated group as well. You see a continuous increase here, and you see also an increase here. That gap that you have here, the gap actually widens, and you have that preserved. It's still 79% of the hospitalized cases that are being prevented with the active vaccine here, versus 81 if you go to the earlier stages. You still have a sustained long protection if you look at it from that way. Will there be need for boosters? We are looking at that as well. It is possible that if we boost, that we get an improved output, because what we're looking at here is the severe cases that get hospitalized. What about the mild breakthrough cases? We're still getting information on that. Perhaps with a booster we could impact things a bit more profoundly for a longer time. That's a possibility. But what I can say is that this schedule is already delivering for a longer period of time. And what we have shown in Thailand over 6 years is that this line doesn't suddenly shoot up. These lines are steady throughout. We have those graphs as well. I didn't want to burden you with similar graphs over and again. But in Thailand, up to 6 years, that line continues, just like that. Now the other question was, who am I to give advice to the Philippines, right? I think you have a lot of internal expertise. Your own professors, either those who worked with us or who are on the outside. There is a solid body of people who know and understand dengue very, very well. What I can see is that there's a lot of dengue in the Philippines. We have a vaccine that could be part of the solutions. The risk-benefit is overwhelmingly positive towards the benefit if you go to children 9 years and above. And going for public programs, to me, is social justice. Because it's okay to put a vaccine out in the private market, but what for those who can't afford? If you have a public program, it's there for everyone, and that's how you will impact society best. At what price, that's a different thing. That's not for me to comment. But I'm in favor of public programs because I think it's fair to everyone, no matter what social layer you come from. You get all a chance to get protection. But I may be biased the way I see things.
Thank you. If I may just add to that, I think it's not in our place to really advise the Department of Health on what they want to do. But I think, just to quote the World Health Organization, they did mention several times that the Philippine implementation program was aligned to the recommendations of the World Health Organization. So it seems like they're doing a good job.
No, it's not just in the Philippines. Because of that data, I'm referring to the potential other countries.
Oh.
What advice would you give, considering that it should be given to at least the 9 o'clock?
Okay. I think the answer will remain the same because even in other countries, we don't really advise the several MOH on the data that we have. We do share with them the data so that they can make their own informed decision on it, and with, of course, as Alan mentioned, their own internal experts per country. Okay, Josh, please.
Thank you. Sorry, I just had one very quick point there. I think your question was about multiple infections in children. So just to say that there are 4 dengue serotypes. Being infected with one does not mean you're immune against all 4. So even if you're infected with 2 serotypes, there are still 2 more serotypes that you can be infected. Even if you've been infected 3 times, there's still 1 more serotype. So just to add that point.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Sol from Sol Razonato. My question is, there are rumors circulating that the dengue vaccine actually causes dengue infection. So how can you comment on that? And then the other question is, there had been some news I read before that also circulated a few years back. It's about the effect which makes individuals impotent and unable to conceive children by some vaccines that was injected to them. So though the news indicated an intentional injection of some components that resulted to such cases, and of course I'm not saying that this vaccine could have been infused to, how can we assure the public of their health security aside from the possible light contraindications and adverse reactions that you mentioned earlier?
Okay, so I'll just clarify because there's 2 things. No? Makiki-intriga na rin ako, ma'am. Ika-clarify ko na yung question mo. Yes, okay. Because I know of all these intrigues. So I think the primary concern is that people say that in the first 2 years it's effective, but on year 3, more children in the vaccinated population actually get severe dengue. Parang yun yung sinasabi nila, diba? So, Alan, you'd like to comment on that? And I think the second one is more related to toxoid. That it causes sterility and that it's given to Filipinos so that we will control the birth population or something like that. I think it's related to that. So I think, Alan, you want to comment?
Yep, so clearly there is some misinformation out there. I can go back to the same graph because I feel that this was trying to address that point. So we're going specifically to children below age 9. And what has happened is that people have noted that there is a difference here between the 2 lines. So you vaccinate and there's less children below 9, so not indicated, but still we showed in the study that they benefit from this vaccine. But then suddenly you see that the blue line is creeping up. And some people in the community take this out of proportion and they take this piece only. They don't look at the full picture. They just take a snapshot here and they generalize that for everyone. And they pretend as if this is the data over 6 years, and they say, oh my God, you will have a lot more dengue cases and hospitalizations in those who are vaccinated. Look what Sanofi has shown here. Well, we have a snapshot. That is not the full picture. We never assess a vaccine or a product for whatever disease based on a small snapshot. So this is malignant distortion, or it's ignorance. We need responsible reporters to understand and work with us. It's easy to undermine public confidence in vaccines. You can be your hero for half a day, but what do you do to the public then? what are they supposed to understand from all this? We need to have honest facts. We don't need to overstate the benefits, but we need to stay with honest facts. And saying that you have demonstrated more disease in people who were vaccinated is clearly false. We have not demonstrated that anywhere. It's in no publication. There is no reference to that. I have shown you not speculation, but I have shown you real data. And we have real data also from Thailand up to 6 years, so that's sustained. The people out there making those claims are very isolated. Most, if not nearly all of your Filipino experts have agreed with what the position is of WHO and do recommend considering this vaccine. It's not to say that these comments have not instilled some doubt, but it's not honest, it's not fair. That's why we appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today, to bring the facts. Thank you.
The other one on the toxoid causing sterility.
Yes, so I think paranoia abounds, right? Some countries believe that if you give OPV, it will lead to sterility and it will wipe out the populations, and it's a ploy by certain countries to control other regions of the world. Others have other fears. There's a lot of fears about vaccines, and a lot of it is irrational. We, of course, want to minimize the negatives in a vaccine, but there's only so many ways you can make a vaccine. Some people are concerned about some traces of mercury. Justified. Try to make it without. It's not that easy. It's an art to make those vaccines. It's an art to make a good, safe, stable vaccine at an affordable price. And so these things are all not substantiated. We are not in the business of deceiving the public and harming the public. We're also healthcare workers, we're also physicians. We may be on the side of the industry, but we wouldn't want to stand here and talk to you and defend a product if we didn't really believe that the benefits far outweigh any of the risks. I'm not aware of any vaccine causing sterility. I've never seen any proof, a shred of proof.
Yes, ma'am, please.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ade, and I'm not sure if you can answer this with your presentation, but my question now is, you just mentioned about the vaccine. There are many people who are scared of it, and I'm one of those. I'm telling you, at my age, I think, I can't recall how many years was that since the last time I had the vaccine. So my question now is there any way or any chances that you can come up with an oral medications or something? Because you're giving it like for 6 months boosters, right? So what about coming up with a tiny or acute capsules for for people like me who's really scared of needles like that? So is there any plans or future products that you can offer, something like that?
So ma'am, the fear is not a safety fear, but a fear of injection. Very common.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear of the fear of vaccines, and I'll come back to the needle issue. But we should not forget that we made vaccines for a lot of diseases that are terrible. You may be afraid of the vaccine, but think of the disease and see which one you prefer. Think back of smallpox, how many millions of people it killed. Think of polio, how many people got crippled for life. Think of so many diseases that today we can, to some degree, brush off. It's not a big thing anymore. And so now we can afford to say, hey, I don't like vaccines, or what is in it exactly, but when these diseases, and if these diseases come back, it would be terrible. So if you need to make a choice, you need to protect yourself. Vaccines is in the top medical accomplishments. I think one of the big things for mankind has been to have better nutrition and better housing. We should appreciate our farmers, we should appreciate our engineers. This is what has given us longer life and healthier life. But close to those two is your community of investigators and researchers with vaccinations. It has had a very positive impact on protecting life and improving life. So I think the benefits of these vaccines far outweigh any of these risks. Fear of needles? Sorry, many people share that. There are nowadays patches that you can rub on the skin so that you don't feel the needle anymore. So you ask someone to look a different side, and you may not even know that you got vaccinated. We are actively working on non-injectable vaccines, inhaled vaccines for one, and it was spurred by things with inhaled insulin. Transcutaneous vaccines. So you just put a little sticker, you leave it for X hours, and that's it. Now it's all easier said than done. It's not a conspiracy by the industry because we're addicted to needles. It's still a more effective way of provoking a body reaction. These other methods are investigational and have limited success. But in the future, I can't predict exactly when. Is it 5 years, 10 years, whatever? I think some products will convert in any of those new ones. I think it will happen for some vaccines, but we're not quite there yet today. So there's hope for you to have less needles.
Yes, there is hope in the future. Yes, ma'am?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Crisanchu from Manila Bulletin. Our government right now is in the middle of budget hearing for the Department of Health. And this is the perfect opportunity for some people who are anti the dengue vaccine to raise their concerns about dengue. So I'm glad that you're here so you can tell us your responses to their issues. So I'll just tell you what I've been reading so far. So the first concern is, there's a doctor, there's a top epidemiologist from one of the leading universities here who say that a child has to undergo a blood test to see if it's seropositive or seronegative before you can determine efficacy and the safety of the vaccine on the child. So what do you think about that? And then number two, also in relation to that, the doctors are asking, although this is nothing to do with dengue, but like our government, the distrust in some people in our government, if the rate and the prices in the Philippines, is it comparable or competitive with the prices that the other countries are selling it for? So that's it.
Want to address the question?
I think Dr. have. It's for someone else to decide for their society if they want to proceed with that or not. I think that any country that offers a public program to a very endemic place for whatever disease, it's a gift. It's a gift to society. That government is trying to protect vulnerable groups from a disease out there. I have shown the data that the safety profile is good. Do you really think that the WHO would come out with a position for a vaccine just because they like us, but the safety is not good? They have gone through this data for 2 years at WHO. We have shared the data with external global experts across many countries, including some from the Philippines, who have crunched all the data, who advised WHO, and there was consensus overwhelmingly that if you use this vaccine in the right age groups, that there's clear benefit. So you may now have an isolated doctor out there coming with his or her own interpretation of the data. Frankly, I think I know who you're referring to. I don't know where that person gets the data from, because I've seen a video clip that refers to the New England Journal of Medicine, and the numbers that are quoted are nothing what we have in the journal. I think this is misleading. I think this is dishonest. How can you show a New England Journal of Medicine heading and then show numbers that have nothing to do with what is in the article? It's suggesting to the public that this is what was published. We don't see where these data come from. So I can't explain. It's for that other doctor to explain his position, but I don't stand by it.
Sorry, so just to clarify the data that this doctor...
These are not data, these are
spreading,
allegations.
Sorry, in social media that's supposed to come from the New England Journal, it's not related to the vaccine.
We don't know where these numbers come from. These are not our numbers. The New England Journal of Medicine article is out there. You can pull it off online. There are annexes that you can pull off as well. Look at all the data. I don't know where these numbers come from. We can't see it. We have sat together with that doctor that I think you're referring to.
Yes.
We've gone through the data. And the comments subdued for a while and then came back with a vengeance. I cannot explain the irrational comments that are being made. I think it's beyond science. Sorry? Serotesting? So the question is, should people get serotested? Because I showed you the results that the vaccine works even better if you were exposed before. However, there is a clear position from WHO, as from many country authorities, that this adds no really much benefit. First of all, there's no test that will conclusively prove dengue only. There is some cross-reaction with other diseases. And also, also, there is a benefit in both groups. Think of the Philippines. The data that Josh has shown is that 9 years and above, 90% of the children has had some exposure already to dengue. So you're clearly in the group in this country to massively benefit from this vaccine. They will be largely in the seropositive group. The few that have not had pre-exposure will still have a benefit. Perhaps not quite as high, they will still have a benefit. So there's no need for testing, but if individuals want that, if countries want that, that's fine. But to date, not a single country has made a firm recommendation on testing.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan. Any more questions? Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. By seeing all the data, what assurance can you give to the public, especially for those who cannot afford the vaccine, and how can you disseminate the information about these vaccine?
Okay, so maybe I'll take that question. As already presented to you earlier, we're very confident about the profile of this vaccine that's actually just drowned out in all this noise that we have right now. Alana's presented the efficacy and safety profile, so we're very confident with it. There are several activities that are ongoing. We're continuously working with the doctors so that they are better informed of the vaccine profile, and we are confident that once there is better understanding of the impact of this disease and the public health impact that the vaccine will make, that public confidence will be restored in the vaccine.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just confused. I share the lady's fright for injections, and I don't see the logic behind so many vaccines proliferating, and that we have to go through. We have to go through pneumonia vaccines. We have to go through so many other HPV, HIV, etc. Will these vaccines not fight against each other in our body, and will we somehow become zombies of our own kind?
Alan, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I can understand at some point when you have a newborn in the family and you have your first visits to the doctor's office and the nurse is arriving with a bunch of needles, it feels intimidating. It looks like the vaccination schedule has gotten more congested, more and more products, and all these poor babies, how can they cope with all that, right? There have been concerns, is this going to lead to an antigen overload? However, the vaccines have largely improved over time. We now have combination vaccines, so meaning less shots, but you get protection against more diseases all in one go. We have hexavalent vaccines. We may even get more than that over time, so you're protecting against 6 diseases with 1 shot. In the past, these were all individual shots, or there was 2-2-2. So we're making improvement by combining them. There is nothing like antigen overload. The reason is that as you're born, as you're thrown in this world, and you leave the sterile motherly environment, you have a swarm of organisms around you. You get exposed. You can't shelter. All these microorganisms are around us. We carry them partially in our bodies, in our guts. You are exposed to it all the time. So antigen exposure is part of life. What we try to do is do that in a smart way, that we can mount a defense, an immune response against the dangerous bugs. And that's still a select few. If you look at all the exposure that a human body gets, it's still a minute amount compared to all the things that happen around a young child. So there's nothing like an antigen overload.
But are you not retarding the body's natural capacity to fight these diseases?
There has been a concern that perhaps the natural thing is better than all these medical manipulations and things like that. And I'm all for Mother Nature. We have to be in awe and appreciate, right? We think sometimes we know, but we may not always know. But what I do know is that historically some of these diseases are nasty. You get bitten by a dog and he may have rabies, you better get your shots. You may not be around in 2 weeks, right? So there are things that you cannot take for granted. If you're talking about casual minor diseases, you can be philosophic about it. If you're talking about horrible diseases that wipe out large populations, I feel we don't have that luxury. We need to protect ourselves. So I wish there was a different way. I think vaccines have had a major impact on mankind. It is one of the major medical accomplishments. I may be very much on the industry side and very much immersed in that, but I've looked at the data back and forth so many times. I'm convinced vaccines is a very important tool we have. So I don't think we should think of less. I think we should try to make it more acceptable, simplify, make it more affordable, all of that.
Combine them.
But don't make it go away. It wouldn't be good. My opinion.
Thank you. Yes, please. Sir.
Good afternoon. I am just curious, why is the frequency of vaccination needs to be every six months and not maybe yearly or twice a year?
Okay. Why is the schedule this way? Is the question. Alan, do you want to comment?
In the early studies, we looked at a few schedules. We tried to congest them more, look at a second dose after 1 month or after 3 months. We found that the body needs time to maximize its response, and the best impact is if you have a window of 6 months between those 1 and 2. Between those 2 and 3, there may be a little bit of room. Will this schedule stay? I think over time that there will be improvement. It could be that the third dose will be spaced out and becomes a booster dose, but we need to generate studies and prove it, and that's all ongoing. So today I can just say that we're with you. We have a new breakthrough vaccine. It's in early stages. This is work that is ongoing in the next wave now. The vaccine schedule could improve. It has happened to other vaccines as well. They come out with a certain schedule that you use in your clinical trials, because your first job is to look at safety and if it works. Once it works, you can see how to tweak it. That's the stage we're at. So it's a 3 dose, 6 months apart based on what we knew at that time, but we hope we can do better.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, good afternoon, sir. I'm Lady Chavez from Business Mirror. My question is for Sir Rachel. I don't know if I really correct if I heard you right earlier, but you mentioned earlier that even though some people are not aware that they have already been exposed to dengue virus, there's a chance that it's our second time to be exposed to the disease. What are the implications that it's already our second time of being exposed to this disease? And will the medications be the same, or will the vaccine be the same? I mean, will there be a post-vaccine, pre-vaccine for that?
So the question is, what if you're not aware? How do you know? And then will the vaccine work whether your previous seropositive had dengue before or not?
Thank you. So regarding the, if you've been infected before, yeah, generally speaking, we say around 75% of first infections are asymptomatic. So you might be infected and you never have any symptoms. And most people do not know. So most people don't have any idea if you've been infected or not.